And welcome to the Family History Foundation. And today, check this out what we're looking at here. We are going to take you through an Anglo-Saxon history reading list of recommended books, and this is going to be fantastic. This is part of a mini-series, I guess you'd call it, where I'm looking at reading lists in historical order for the Anglo-Saxon era, for the Norman era of England, and also the Plantagenet era of England. So those are all in this little mini series here and will be referenced throughout. So yes, you see our little map here where our Anglo-Saxons and Utes settled. And so here we go, and you can check the full article in the description below to familyhistoryfoundation.com. So here we go. Welcome to your Anglo-Saxon history reading list of recommended books. And I've covered a wealth of books from historical to cultural to genetic to archaeological to inspire your imagination. The list includes books that I have read or some I come recommended on the subject, and I have to sort of disclaim obviously that this list is nowhere near exhaustive, because when it comes to books on the Anglo-Saxon history or stuff, I mean, there are literally thousands upon thousands of books. But I've done my research over the years, and I'm putting together the preeminent list for you. So if you're looking for stuff to read in historical order with respect to different sort of areas, I have absolutely got you covered. You do not need to go anywhere else. But anyway, I encourage people to always research on their own, of course, obviously, because that's what any scholar would do. So anyway, I hope you guys find value in what's coming at you right now, and so they're all worth a read. And for this list, you can read them in any order that you like. With the Norman history reading list and the Plantagenet, I've actually made the list and compiled them in historical order, so you can actually kind of get to that. So we're going to go through a bit of setup before we get to the list, because kind of having a little background on who were the Anglo-Saxons, right? And also a little bit of information about the Anglo-Saxon age is super compelling, kind of will prime your brain to sort of really be interested in this reading list. Okay, here we go. So who were the Anglo-Saxons? And there's things you may or may not know, and of course this is not a treatise on who they were, but when using the term Anglo-Saxons, I'm really describing the Anglo-Saxons in England, and that's what this reading list is primarily focused on. As we know, they came from the northern parts of Germany, Denmark, and other places in between, a swath of that area of northwestern Europe. But what I'm really concentrating on here is the Anglo-Saxon age in England. Okay, so according to Sir Frank Stenton, the first book on this list, the Anglo-Saxon tribes first set foot in England approximately 449 AD and have essentially never left, as many of us with English heritage still carry remnant DNA from those times. And when I say many of us, I include me in part of that genetic sort of offshoots. But other authors have the Anglo-Saxons marauding through England a bit earlier than the 4th century. So it's why it's good to sort of look at different sources on things, right? The Anglo-Saxon tribes. Okay, so Brian Sykes, who looked at the genetic structure of Anglo-Saxon England, estimates that the percentage of males with Anglo-Saxon Y chromosome markers, and Y chromosome markers are only found in males, that's why it says males with Anglo-Saxon Y chromosome markers, run about 20% in East Anglia, which is the highest in England, on page 286. Hint, for the uninitiated, any place name in with the prefix ang or similar variant such as England or East Anglia has its root in the Anglo-Saxons, so or more specifically the tribe called the Angles. And this is why it's kind of important to have a little bit of backdrop. It is therefore important to know for your Anglo-Saxon history reading list that the actual Anglo-Saxons are a conglomerate of at least 3 different Germanic tribes: the Angles, Saxons, and the Utes. Each of these distinct tribes invaded England together at different times and as both allies and enemies. So it was a very sort of complex interaction, obviously. Think about 3 different tribes. Would they get along? Would they not? Together? But they all sort of came from the sort of similar origin. And that's why we call them the Anglo-Saxons. Place names are strewn throughout England. Like place names in England with the term Anglia, there are also place names with the term sex. And no, it's not that obvious. The suffix sex is short for Saxon. And honestly, it should really be spelt Sax. Places like Wessex, Sussex, Essex are actually coordinates for where the Saxon tribes fought, carved out territory, and settled. So think about Wessex is West Saxon, Sussex, South Saxon, and Essex, East Saxon. Somewhat unoriginally, the Utes settled in Kent, which is kind of like southeast. They were the smallest of the Anglo-Saxon tribes, and I, for one, am just glad we don't have to go around referring to this whole lot as the Anglo-Saxon Utes. We might have had to invent a new acronym at that point. So the Anglo-Saxon age, and again, you can kind of, if you look at this reference map here, you can sort of tell where the predominant sort of settlement was for each of these tribes in relationship to where they came from. And we have a lot to thank for the Anglo-Saxon invasion of England, actually. And the informal history goes that the Romans were looking for hired guns to help fight the native Britons who were unceasing in their quest to take their land back. The Roman Empire, already beginning to collapse, called upon Anglo and Saxon tribes, then living in continental Europe, look at the map, ranging from the north of the modern-day German city of Hamburg, all the way up to Denmark. And you can look at the map there below. Meet Hengist and Horsa. Not being entirely satisfied at their treatment by the Romans, these two Anglo-Saxon warriors, being superior, decided to have a go at acquiring their own land by force in England. Interestingly, historian Mark Morris, who is a gem of a writer and an author, kind of slags them off as not having any basis in historical reality, and he says this in the second book on our list on page 26. Pretty cool stuff. And no matter how you look at the Anglo-Saxons established a foothold in England that would never be relinquished until the Norman invasion of 1066, and even then it never really dissipated or came to an end, obviously because a lot of us carry that Anglo-Saxon genetic marker, or what can be equated to it anyway. For even then, the Anglo-Saxon royal lines continued through the marriage into the Norman dynasty of England, so it never really went away. And the Normans being of Viking descent. So technology. The Anglo-Saxons did a lot, actually, for the technological advancement of things in England. So although they were technically invaders, they did bring with them many technological innovations then in play in continental Europe, which had not been known in England at that time, right? And this is true historically and for a very, very broad swath of looking at historiography of invaders bringing technology with them. These technologies included advancements in farming, building, burial practices, religion, place names, writing, poetry, and language. Okay, whether you call them advancements or shifts, whatever you want to say. And it's also kind of worthy to note that Anglo-Saxons were not Vikings. That's a fair point to remember. Okay, so Anglo-Saxons, Normans, all right? And just to kind of flesh this out a bit further, although somewhat similar in Northern European origins and definitely feistiness, the Anglo-Saxons and Vikings actually did battle with one another over centuries for control of England. Even the Norman invasion had Viking overtures, as the seat of power at that time was just recently contested by Canute the Great's descendants in England. Speaking of the Norman invasion of 1066, That date is traditionally signaled as the end of the Anglo-Saxon reign of England, with Harold Godwinson being its last king. All right, so here we go. We're just going to jump towards the list. I have a link to the article here if you want to sort of read more in detail about it or go over what we just sort of went over. But number one on the list will always probably be Sir Frank Stenton's Anglo-Saxon England. Published in 2001, it is a compendium of this age, and basically any other scholar will always refer back to this. The research is just so stellar, and at almost 800 pages, it's a dense read. I have to tell you, it's a very, very dense read. And if you're going to purchase this book, sort of make sure you publish a larger edition, because I have one of the smaller paperback. The one you actually see here is my book cover. And the font is a little small. At 800 pages, it can get a little challenging, but it's just so above and beyond. So that's where I would recommend starting for sure. But of course, we have options, and a more recent option, published in 2021, is The Anglo-Saxons: History of the Beginnings of England from 400 to 1066 by none other than Mark Morris, who is an absolutely gem and one of my favorite authors on this period of time, and he's just superlative. Can't say enough. Anything that comes out by Mark Morris, well, actually not everything, I'll have to disagree with my own statement there for a sec, is actually super cool, and we'll get to one of those. Saxons, Vikings, and Celts by Brian Sykes. This was amazing. So this actually covers the genetic roots of Britain and Ireland. So it's really looking at the Saxons, Anglo-Saxons, we're taking that piece of it, Vikings and Celts, which are sort of three overlapping layers of history, but it looks at their genetic origins, who they are, where they're distributed, not only back in their own times, but in medieval times, or pre-medieval times actually, now, like where the descendants of these different tribes live now and how they're sort of aggregated. And so it's just a fascinating read into the genetic roots of the British Isles. I mean, it's just fabulous work by Brian Sykes. And Anglo-Saxon Chronicles by Anne Savage. This is a kind of neat, almost coffee table book. And it's kind of like, one of these things that you'd find, at Barnes & Noble. It was published by Barnes & Noble Publishing. And it's kind of a cool, big, heavy book, but it's really, really full of images and sort of really cool things. And some of these I'm going to sort of skip over more quickly, and you can come back to this post and read it on your own. Anglo-Saxon Age by J.V. Fisher is kind of a cool read here. The Saxons and Normans by Tim Wood. Another kind of cool little book. And when I say little, it's only 50 pages. But it's pretty neat, actually, some of the stuff they have in there. The Story of England by Michael Wood was a kind of cool book. I really enjoyed reading this book as well, although it does not just cover the Anglo-Saxon. It's sort of this, sweeping narrative of Britain from its origins, a la Winston Churchill, all the way until modern age. But the beginning, the treatment of the Anglo-Saxons in this book is actually pretty nifty, I would say. Prehistoric England by Graham Clark talks about this. I believe many people know about this book. I found this at a book sale and had to read it, so I'm including it here because it's pretty well written and it has some pretty neat perspectives on the age. Queen Emma and the Vikings is kind of cool. It looks at the Vikings and Anglo-Saxon era and kind of includes a lot of the wars going on between the sort of transition period between the Anglo-Saxons and Viking invasion. It's pretty neat stuff, actually. But Foundation by Peter Ackroyd, this is another cool one, and of course this is a sort of more broad brush treatment of England, from the history of England to the Tudors. So but the beginning part that touches on what we're concerned about, the Anglo-Saxon era, was pretty cool. I found his narrative writing pretty effective. Harold, the Last Anglo-Saxon King, is kind of cool. I want to sort of really speak to this one here, which is The Origins of the Anglo-Saxons by Jean Manco. R.I.P. She passed away, and she was an amazing scholar, and she wrote This is, I really highly recommend this. And then you can see the sort of subtitle, Decoding the Ancestry of the English. And she really goes deep into understanding who the Anglo-Saxons were, not just in terms of England, but where they came from and how they saw themselves. Like the way she sort of treated this. And I have a Family History Foundation review of this book. And I'm going to pop over there really quickly just to sort of look at what I wrote about it. And just to kind of highlight how she conceived of this book is literally about the deep origins of several strands of European DNA converging into a singular story. That's the Anglo-Saxon story. But the quote she has here is very, very powerful. Books on the Anglo-Saxons traditionally start with the arrival in post-Roman Britain of Germanic-speaking peoples and progress chronologically to that famous date of 1066. This book is different in structure and scope. We start with the vision that Anglo-Saxons had of themselves and their ancestors. Powerful, powerful stuff. So this is a great, great book. And anything written by her, actually, you'll find of benefit. Blood of the British by Catherine Hills. Pretty cool. History of the Kings of Britain by Sir Geoffrey Monmouth, of course, was kind of almost written in the time and republished, thousands and thousands of time. And kind of worth a read. It was kind of a medieval take on medieval origins, laced with sort of hagiographies and, but it's definitely worth looking at. Beowulf and the Debatable Land. If you guys don't know of Graham Robb, he's kind of a cool, unique author in the things he writes about, but he's writing in a modern perspective that has touches to the Anglo-Saxon times, and I did a review of this book. I found this book by accident, and it just really just sort of jumped out at me, and I want to just jump over there real fast to the book review I did. But I think about this, and I'm trying to describe it in my own words, but the story that he puts forth is about this. There remains lost in time and oblivious today some 2,000-year-old system left over, like pre-Norman invasion Anglo-Saxon like traditions that got lost in what he calls the Debatable Land, which is the borderline between England and Scotland. And the whole idea of a 3,000-year-old society continuing to practice their traditional culture unchanged and undaunted in the face of modernity is something that should be applauded. This is what he discovered in his book. And that's what Graham Robb's book amounts to. He's documented an entire ethnography of uniquely British people. So it's just another fascinating read that I think needs more attention. So, hey, that's it. Those are the things on my list, and you can check them out. Thanks for checking this out. Liking the Family History Foundation. If you've kind of enjoyed what you've heard, then give us a like, subscribe, whatever's. Enjoy yourself. Have a great day, and thanks for tuning in.